afternoon, in our first amphitheatre session here with our panelists, we're going to focus on the importance of effective partnerships to deliver on those SDGs. And I want to welcome right here on the panel with me, Douglas Rutzen, who's the President and CEO of the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, to give us an opening address. Douglas, over to you.
So there's broad consensus around the value of multi-stakeholder partnerships, but we can't assume that they'll simply coalesce, that in order to have multi-stakeholder partnerships, we need an enabling environment. But that's a pretty vague term. What does that mean? So in the next 4 minutes, I'll introduce some key dimensions of that specific issue. First, we have to look at the legal and regulatory framework for development partners. Development actors need enabling laws and regulations that allow them to operate and freely and fully engage in development activities as independent development actors. This is important so that they can engage in development in their own right, both individually and in partnership with others. Second, we need space for development actors to be able to come together in development partnerships. The progress report found that only 51% of countries have the elements in place for multi-stakeholder dialogue. The third factor relates to resources. This is an issue I think we'll hear from all development actors, the need for resources so that we can engage in development. And this is a particular challenge for civil society. In many countries, it's quite easy for a business to be able to receive, for example, international funding, while there's sectoral inequity, where civil society organizations are challenged in receiving the same sources of funding. And the final dimension relates to accountability and monitoring. All stakeholders need to live up to the challenge of accountability to each other and to their constituencies.
From each of your perspectives, I want us to dwell into two things in particular. Number one, what are the challenges you face when it comes to partnerships, effective partnerships? Number two, what are the actions we need to take to transform this situation? So what do you recommend really as the way forward?
All of you over the last 2 days have heard repeatedly mention of the shrinking civic space and the lack of enabling environment or diminishing enabling environment for civil society. So I think the first challenge I would mention is just a difficulty of perhaps getting, work in progress, let's say, of getting people to acknowledge, understand, accept that there are particular issues that civil society groups face with respect to their enabling environment. So all the elements that were already mentioned, the legal, regulatory, funding, policy space, or capacity to dialogue. So in the context of GPEDC, of course, we're talking about a partnership. So each actor needs to have an enabling environment, but we need to also have an environment that enables us to work together. And some of the challenges there are lack of trust, definitely the power imbalances that exist. We are starting from different points in perspective. I would also offer that the at least dual role that civil society plays, one being in this kind of partnership, the voice of the most marginalized often, and how enabling is this partnership to allow that voice to surface. And the other role is that we're also an actor in development cooperation, right, like governments and like other actors. But making sure that we're watching those two roles and that we're enabling both and allowing them in the partnership, I think presents particular challenge. We believe that if we're able to actually succeed in working in partnerships with the diverse stakeholders, we will contribute to more effective development cooperation. And with respect to the SDGs, we will be better positioned to achieve the SDGs if we learn to better work together and if we're able to make this partnership work, right? If we actually implement all the commitments that we've made to each other, we're going to go a long way.
For short of time, I straight go to that topic, the challenges of enabling environment for development partnership, how I see it. I see dwindling aid flow is a big challenge, if I say the truth. SDGs are the latest outcome of the promise of universal cooperation. Promises need to be translated to offering the flows of, to offering the trade flow, offering the aid flows and facilitating trade and sharing of knowledge and best practices. For example, the GPEDC 2015-16 monitoring report said it required multi-stakeholder engagement for the monitoring of indicators 2 and 3. The GPEDC's 2016 progress report mentions that 40% of the reporting countries point to the lack of the resources and training opportunities for capacity building among the stakeholders as a key obstacle to multi-stakeholder dialogue. GPEDC, how can help to overcome this capacity constraint, must keep this in their agenda. It would be very valuable if the GPEDC could promote learning about multi-sector stakeholders partnership at the country level, in line with its global light, country-focused approach. It is well positioned to look at how it can support and advance multi-stakeholder partnership and enabling environment for them at country level through appropriate capacity development initiatives.
Well, having a donor perspective, I would say this challenge that is most important today is the shrinking space for civil society. It's important with space for all actors, but the shrinking space for civil society is the trend where we go in the wrong direction. Second, I would say also related to civil society primarily, but to some extent also for the business sector, is that we tend to make these actors as donors and governments too instrumental for a short-term results agenda. Pushed in from us, donors, or from governments, where we don't support actors like the civil society in its own right. And the third, if I take the time to have a third, more broad agenda, is that even though the 2030 agenda is there, we've had a very good process leading up to that agenda, I think it's also true to say that we still work far too much in silos. We are working very hard at CEDA now to become better facilitators and not focus so much on being funders, because I think what we can do better is to bring together different stakeholders supporting platforms. Having said that, the most important solution, so to say, to that challenge is, of course, to create domestic multi-stakeholder platforms. And I think that I mean, I've actually been a politician myself, and it's always a pain in the neck to have civil society coming complaining. But you understand that in the long run, independent civil society is so important because
insufficient consideration for the local context and priorities in national development policies. I thought I should also talk about the engagement of local and regional governments, which requires appropriate legal and regulatory framework, as well as institutional mechanism and financial resources for support. So for me, I think the collaboration and the working together between the three spheres of government can be better. And then propose interventions. One is the one that I've just articulated, the link and the working relationship between these three stakeholders, the donors, the civil society, and government, but also central government, as I said, and the international community should recognize local government as full-fledged and indispensable partners, not only in the development, but in the implementation and monitoring of national development strategies and programs. Further support for local government and their associations, for me, I think it is very important. But also, if you flip the coin, I think in turn, local governments and their associations should design ways to ensure proper consultations with citizens, particularly the civil society. And we hope to see reaffirmation of the commitment made in Mexico to encourage providing further support to local and regional governments to enable them to assume more fully their roles in policy making, service delivery, and in enhancing participation, which includes transparency and accountability.
The first one is that my parliament, the IALA, East African Legislative Assembly, like many other parliaments in Africa, they are totally ignored when partnerships are being signed. Second, the parliament's lack of capacity, both in funding and in staffing as well. And also, when the big decisions, like in MDGs, in SDGs, are being taken, the parliaments are absent. They don't know sometimes on what has been decided. And if you give us an exam as parliamentarians, what are now the 17 SDGs, I'm sure 50% will fail. I think it is well understandable on what could be done. Mm-hmm. We should be really involved.
Consultation and creating systems and processes that ensure there are no gaps and loopholes and that you're included in the processes.
We face quite a number of challenges. One, of course, is that interaction necessarily brings us into some form of conflict amongst the partners because of different cultures and approaches to doing things. As some of the CSOs or donors are already involved in development issues, but their contributions, when they bring them together to cascade in this manner, we are constantly having to massage, the processes in order to make them harmonious, so that they fit in the various plans and strategies of the stakeholders. The third challenge I would refer to, I think has been mentioned, the issue of trust, especially in the initial stages. It's something that you can deal with, but you need quite a bit of skill in managing the process of harmonizing impressions and aspirations.
From what I heard, I think there are a couple of dimensions that we need to focus on. First, we heard quite a bit about the need for laws, and as Yulia said, practices that enable all stakeholders to individually and in partnership engage in development. Second, we need space for development actors to be able to come together in development partnerships. To clear the bottleneck, we need institutionalized mechanisms and processes to support the many forms partnerships can take. We heard discussions around the culture of collaboration and the need to develop that. Issues of trust, ways to address power imbalances. Every one of our speakers talked about the need to include other sectors, whether it be the business community, local government, parliaments, even donors and policy dialogue. So I think the takeaway is engage early and often with all stakeholders. Third, we talked about resources. And again, we heard from virtually all the speakers about limitations in terms of resources. We also talked about limitations of resources on different sectors, particularly civil society. UN Special Rapporteur Kiai talked about the issue of sectoral inequity. Why is it that civil society faces greater challenges to resource mobilization than for others? And then there was an overall theme of accountability and monitoring. and it's important to build further capacity to measure progress in the enabling environment as a contribution to SDG 17. So in sum, the enabling environment is a key component to multi-stakeholder partnerships.